I've recently tried to contact Rabbi Tovia Singer, and one of the questions that I had for him was the one that he just recently made a video about. So I figured, well, I don't have to wait for him to contact me back, or if he would even give me the time of day. So I want to kind of pose a question or opposition as well to his claim. So my question was, if Paul and the apostles were knowingly lying about what they were teaching, then why would they be willing to die for something they know is a lie? And he responds to this, not to me directly, but he responds to this question.
It's very interesting that when the disciples are putatively executed, that's because they're so great and wonderful, and we should love them and be inspired by their death. The death of the followers of Jesus demonstrates the truthfulness of Christianity, whereas the death and suffering of Jews somehow shows the wrongfulness of Judaism. I hope you got that. And those of you who are or were ever Christians, no, I'm not making this up. Those of you who ever been in the church know that I am not strawmanning this. I'm not inventing this. Why is there these unequal weights and measurements? That's what I want to know. Why is it that the death and suffering of Christian followers of Jesus demonstrates the truthfulness of the cross, but the death and suffering of Jews at the hands of Christians, which is the ultimate mind-blowing chutzpah, that demonstrates the wrongfulness of Judaism? I rest my case.
So the way that he's processing this is, why would Jews have to die for what they believe, and it's nothing to look at as, oh, you know, that's the ultimate peak of the ultimate goal to reach, you know, kind of like how Muslims also, you know, to be a martyr is the number one thing to aspire for. But then when they die, they're not viewed in that way to the rest of the world. They don't view Jewish people who have been persecuted as, you know, they reach that ultimate goal of dying for what they believe. But when a Christian dies and becomes a martyr, that they're all of a sudden, just everything that we should aspire to be. And they are the role model of our faith. And the difference that I see here is that people can die for what they believe is true. And this is the way I'm processing this. Like he wouldn't agree with Muslim, right? And what they die for. But he would be willing to die for his as well, for his faith. A Christian would be willing to die for us. So I believe that probably Christians nowadays, today, we would probably be in that same camp. But the apostles are something different because they claim to see the resurrected body of Jesus Christ. Us, for example, most of us have never seen that. Now you can have people who claim that Jesus appeared to them. But it's not like concrete evidence, I guess, but you could say that, that's the same thing applied to the apostles, but it was multiple people that saw the same thing, and sometimes were in the same room, and these are the claims. So it's two different things, I think, because people are saying, I have seen Jesus Christ, I've seen him die on the cross, and then I seen him resurrected. Or I knew that he was in the tomb, and then all of a sudden he was not in the tomb anymore. And then he was walking among us, things like that. He was in the flesh. James put his hands in his side and whatever, things like that. And then Paul claimed to see Jesus revealing himself to him on the road to Damascus. So you have things that people have claimed to see. So if they are lying on purpose to try and give themselves a better name or whatever their motive might have been. I don't think any motive would have been enough for them to be willing to die for that lie. So that's where I see the difference, because like us Christians now, we're basically believing their word. And you see this in John where Jesus says, I pray for them also, not the apostles alone, but also they who hear his word. So we are the people that have heard their word, and then so forth. So it seems like to me that we are probably more in the camp with Jews, the Jewish traditions now, not the same, but just religion in general when it comes to information being passed down. So I don't see the logic, the same logic with the disciples saying, I know that this is a lie, but I'm going to die for it. So, and then he comes with the argument as well that, well, there's no proof that they were died as martyrs either. And so then I have to ask, well, okay, I give you that. Like, I'm not trying to deny anything like that, but there is a precedent that people had that Christians were being killed. So there is that in history, right? You had Jesus, you had John, that is recorded in the writings. So it's not like it's unlikely, especially those who are to be the apostles of the foundation of the church, to also be martyred. So tradition, you could say that they made it up, but the problem I see with that is that when he argues that there's unequal judgments being made about the martyrs from what I was saying earlier, is that I see him doing the same thing, because who is to say that what he believes is not just tradition passed down? Like, how did they remain Jews for that 2,000-year period of not being a nation? It's by traditions being passed down. So, but I do agree that a lot of, and I mean a lot, is we've adopted from the Roman Catholic Church. And so I'm not conflating the two. I'm not being ignorant of that either. But I can't conflate those two. So I can't see that he's also using the same judgment and the equally being equal in his judgments and logic when it comes to that. Because who was there somebody in Genesis, when God created the earth, was there somebody when that happened to write it down and make that account? There has to be, you have like floods, you have Noah and the flood, you have things, you even have prophets that would write about things that were either in the future or the past, books that were about the past, that was way beyond for them to be able to know for sure what exactly happened, because it was hundreds of years before them. So there's a level of tradition being passed down, same as Christianity. So it doesn't seem like just because something is passed down through tradition that it's necessarily wrong. It can be manipulated and messed with, but it doesn't mean, because then you would have to look at your own religion and say, well, how much of what I know is being passed down to me? And how do I know that they didn't just create some religion, whatever for our nation, et cetera, et cetera? And you can make the argument, well, there was a nation that saw these things at Mount Sinai, and with Jesus, it was only a handful of people, the disciples, and then the so-called 500 people that saw his resurrection as well. And you can have that argument. But even before that, what did we do with that stuff before Mount Sinai, before the Exodus? What do we do with Genesis? What do we do with these things? What do we do with the Nephilim? This has to be, the creation account. This has to be stuff that is passed down, because how else will they know? How else will they know to record something that was passed down to them? So to me, if people are going to use Christianity and Jesus to say, oh, it's all made up, they made it up, there's no difference between Jesus and Zeus. I believe there's a lot of difference, but even if you want to say that, right, like that he, and there's also a precedent too, that it was like Jesus said, and Stephen, right, Stephen the martyr, when he told them, he said, you are stiff-necked people. And when you think and you look back at Moses and when he said the same things, and how they would kill the prophets, there's something that I can't ignore about this tendency for Jewish people to reject God's anointed ones going and giving forth the word of God. Like it's nonstop through all the prophets in the Old Testament. The prophet would come, start declaring God's word, and they would reject, and traditionally were martyred. I don't know if he holds these positions as well, with the prophets being killed, and some of them are recorded, but traditionally, people and how they died, old prophets and things like that. I'm sure that he would probably agree with those traditions, but those would be traditions that you would also have to say they were just passed down, and who is to hold them accountable and say, well, how do we know that you didn't just make that up, to try and govern the world and whatever, things like that. So to me, he's also not using the same judgment that he's accusing others of when he says, why is it when Christians die a martyr, it's this glorified thing, but then when Jews are persecuted everywhere they go, then it's not a glorified thing? Well, that's I can say the same thing with Jewish people. I told you what I believe the difference is between those two. With the apostles, I think the apostles is a totally different thing, because they're literally believing a lie, and all the people are sharing in this same lie, this same hallucination. I don't think so. And it's, but he's not using the same logic as well when it comes to Roman Catholicism. How do we know they didn't just make this up and just pass it down tradition to tradition? I do think there are a lot of things that were made up by the Roman Catholic Church, but that doesn't mean that there can't be truth in some of the things that were passed down, and knowledge that is passed down from generation to generation when it came to the first century church, because you have to do the same thing with Judaism. You'd have to do the same thing. You'd have to have the same logic with that. So it's like, okay, so you don't want me to believe that Jesus, was a Messiah, but then why would I believe? What is the difference between the logic that I'm using for Christianity and then your logic to believing in Judaism, when you would have to basically rely on the same things of tradition and teachings passed down from other people and books that are written hundreds of years after the events? So to me, Judaism, if you're going to say that Christianity is crazy and just out of this world, Greek, this and that, well, when I think about Judaism, if I came with that same logic, I could say the same thing about that. Not the Greek version, even though there probably were philosophers and stuff that deviated from the, monotheism. But so I guess you could say that maybe some of them were also influenced by the outside nations. I think that's apparent in the scriptures. I could say the same thing about you. I could say that, they made it all up and they created a God. They did all these things, lied about all these things and miracles, and wrote these books hundreds and thousands of years after the event of Genesis, creation account, all these things. Or then you could say, well, maybe it was an angel that came and told them about what happened in Genesis when God created everything. Well, how do you know that's not a hallucination? It's the same arguments can be applied to what he uses against Christians. So why would I go from my insanity religion to your insanity religion? Right? So anyways, I wanted to address that and kind of bring some other logic too, because I respect a lot of what he says. I like listening to him. Brings a lot of things to the table. Get you inside of Jewish thought, and so I have a lot of respect for him. But I can't help but notice that he kind of does the same thing to Christians that he's accusing us of doing to them. So, but at the same time, not all Christians are the same. Not all Christians are Trinity either. So that maybe I don't know how he deals with those situations either. So, anyways, see ya.